In late August of 1887, Sarah Whitaker reached the fence of Mercer Ranch with 2 children, 1 worn bundle of clothes, and almost nothing else. Sarah was 34 years old. Her son Noah was 16. Her daughter Emma had just turned 10. They had walked for almost 2 days across the dry Wyoming Territory after leaving the small settlement of Pine Hollow. Sarah carried a cast-iron skillet tied to the outside of her bundle. Noah carried a thin wool blanket over one shoulder. Emma carried nothing except a tin cup and the faded cloth doll she had owned since she was 5. They had no horse, no wagon, no food worth counting. When Daniel Mercer stepped out of the barn and saw them standing at his fence, Sarah did not ask for charity. Daniel was 44, broad-shouldered, quiet, and already gray at the temples. His wife had died 7 years earlier. Since then, Mercer Ranch had become a place built for one man who had forgotten how to expect anyone else. Sarah kept her voice steady. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep accounts, tend chickens, preserve food, work a garden, help with livestock if someone shows me what needs doing. I am not asking for money today. I am asking for a roof over my children while I earn our keep." Daniel looked at Noah. The boy stood stiffly beside his mother. One hand remained close to the folding wood chisel inside his coat pocket. It had belonged to his father. Then Daniel looked at Emma. She was staring toward the ranch house, pretending she could not smell the wood smoke drifting from its chimney. Daniel did not ask why Sarah's husband was missing. He did not ask what kind of trouble had followed them from Pine Hollow. He looked once toward his empty house, then back at the children. "Help me keep the house running," he said. "Your children work if they're able. Nobody goes hungry while they're under my roof." Emma's fingers slowly loosened around Sarah's skirt. Noah did not move. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. Daniel believed he had opened his door to save 3 strangers. Before winter ended, Sarah Whitaker would save his ranch. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had still believed her husband would return. Luke Whitaker had left Pine Hollow with their mule, his carpenter's tools, and the ownership papers to Sarah's hand-crank sewing machine. He said he had been hired to repair freight wagons headed east toward Cheyenne. He promised 4 days. "You'll have flour enough for winter when I get back," he told Sarah. He kissed Emma's forehead. He told Noah to look after the house. Then he rode away. 4 days passed. Then 6, then 10. On the 11th morning, Gideon Price, the owner of Pine Hollow's trading post, knocked on Sarah's door carrying a black leather ledger. He was not cruel. That somehow made the news worse. Luke had purchased flour, salt pork, whiskey, harness, leather, tobacco, tools, and several other supplies on credit. He had also borrowed cash. The total debt was $38.70. Luke had pledged the mule, Sarah's sewing machine, and 2 wool blankets as security. Sarah stared at the page. There must be a mistake. Gideon turned the ledger toward her. Luke's signature sat beneath every transaction. Noah read it over his mother's shoulder. His expression changed before Sarah's did. Their landlord gave Sarah 5 days to leave. She sold a copper kettle. Then the small bed. Then Luke's spare winter coat. She kept the cast-iron skillet, the children's clothes, a few family photographs, and 1 thin wool blanket. The afternoon before they left, Ruth Bell came quietly to see her. Ruth was a 68-year-old widow who had lived outside Pine Hollow long enough to know nearly every family within 20 miles. "There is a rancher west of Cottonwood Ridge," Ruth said. "Daniel Mercer. Lost his wife years ago. Keeps cattle. Needs somebody around that house whether he'll admit it or not. Would he hire me?" "He might give you a chance." Noah heard the conversation. "People only make promises while the promise is useful to them," he said. Sarah turned toward him. "That what your father taught you?" Noah's jaw tightened. "It's what he proved." Emma said nothing until they were walking out of Pine Hollow before sunrise. Then she asked the question Sarah had hoped she would not ask. "Does Papa know where we're going?" Sarah tightened the rope around their bundle. "If he comes looking, Ruth knows where to send him." Emma seemed satisfied. Noah did not. 2 exhausting days later, they reached Mercer Ranch. The ranch house was made from cottonwood logs, reinforced with rough stone around the chimney. It stretched perhaps 30 feet across, with 2 small bedrooms behind the main room. The structure was sound. The life inside it had faded. Cold ashes filled the fireplace. Dust covered the windows. One chair faced the wall instead of the table. A woman's faded blue shawl still hung from a wooden peg. Only one place at the table showed signs of regular use. Daniel pointed toward the smaller rear room. "The children can sleep there." Then he looked at Sarah. "There's space beside the stove for a bedroll until I can fix something better." He gave them the ranch rules. Breakfast before daylight, water buckets never empty, chickens locked before sunset. No one entered the hay barn without telling him. Children worked according to their ability. Noah asked the question he had been holding since they arrived. "How long can we stay?" Daniel looked directly at him. "As long as your mother keeps her agreement and the 2 of you work honestly, nobody in this house is putting you back on the road." Noah said nothing. That night, Sarah knelt beside the west wall. She held her hand an inch above the floorboards. Cold air moved across her fingers. She shifted toward the corner. The draft became stronger. Sarah looked toward the woodpile outside the window, then toward the fireplace. She said nothing. In the children's room, Noah unfolded his father's bone-handled chisel beneath the blanket. Emma saw the steel catch the lantern light. "You think he's coming back?" she whispered. Noah closed the blade. "No." "Then why do you carry that?" Noah stared at the ceiling. "Because he left it." Before sunrise the next morning, Sarah was already awake. She did not begin by making the house pretty. She began with air ashes, water, and heat. The east windows opened first. Dusty curtains came down. She swept every corner. She scraped soot from the fireplace and checked the chimney draft. The smoke did not rise properly. Daniel was outside milking when Noah climbed onto the roof and found the problem. An old bird's nest had narrowed the chimney opening. Noah pulled it free. Inside, Emma cleaned jars until she discovered dried beans, shriveled apples, salt, and an old sewing box that had belonged to Daniel's wife. Sarah made cornmeal porridge. She roasted the apples. She brewed weak coffee. When Daniel returned from the barn, he stopped in the doorway. Morning light reached the table. 4 tin bowls waited. The chair that had faced the wall had been turned back toward the others. Sarah did not sit in it. She chose the bench beside Emma. Daniel noticed. He said nothing. Later that morning, Sarah hung a narrow strip of cloth near the west wall. It moved constantly. Daniel watched it flutter. "The house has survived plenty of winters." Sarah nodded. "Surviving isn't the same as using firewood wisely." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. The children began ranch work the next morning. Daniel taught Noah how to inspect gates, carry water without wasting it, tie a proper lead rope, and approach cattle from the shoulder. "Never walk directly behind a nervous animal." Noah nodded. Daniel handed him a rope. Noah jerked too hard. Daniel took it back. He untied the knot and tied it again slowly. Then he returned the rope. Noah frowned. "Why be gentle with something that could knock you across the yard?" Daniel looked toward the cattle. "Because strength that needs fear isn't much strength." Noah remembered those words. Emma received different work. Daniel showed her a weak calf in the livestock shed. The calf had a pale silver-gray coat and thin legs. "Change the damp bedding. Mix warm water into the milk. Check her ears. Watch her nose. Listen for coughing." Emma crouched beside the calf. The animal lifted its head. For the first time since leaving Pine Hollow, Emma smiled without forcing it. "I'm calling her Silver." Daniel nodded. "Then Silver is your responsibility while she's sick." Within days, Emma knew exactly how much milk the calf drank. She noticed that Silver coughed more on mornings when the barn had been closed tightly overnight. Sarah noticed something else. The ranch was not a collection of separate buildings. Everything affected everything else. The northwest fence trapped grass and dust. A dark line of dried mud showed where spring water had pooled beside the hay barn. The hay barn floor sat lower than the livestock shed. The roof barely protected the western wall. Hay bales rested directly on packed earth. An old drainage ditch pointed runoff toward the barn instead of away from it. Nothing appeared completely broken. That was what made Sarah uneasy. She had grown up around her father's small grist mill in Nebraska. He had taught her that the worst failures rarely began with something dramatic. They began with small things everyone had grown accustomed to ignoring. A crooked channel. A damp beam. A wheel set slightly wrong. Wind pressing from the same direction year after year. One afternoon, Ruth Bell arrived in a wagon with dried apples and news from town. She looked around the yard. "People are already saying Sarah Whitaker runs Mercer Ranch," Daniel, who was repairing a harness nearby, said without looking up. "People in Pine Hollow ought to find more work." Ruth laughed. Then Sarah asked her about winters in the valley. Ruth's expression changed. 13 years ago, snow buried the old hay barn so deep they chopped through the rear wall to reach the feed. Sarah stopped cutting apples. "Which direction was the storm coming from?" Ruth pointed northwest. That afternoon, Sarah found a length of rope, tied knots at measured intervals, and began walking the ranch yard. She measured slopes, distances, roof lines, barn heights, low ground, the direction of old drifts still visible in bent grass. She carried a smoke-blackened stick and pushed it into the soil at different points. Daniel watched for several minutes. "You spent an hour measuring ground I've walked every day for 14 years. Sarah straightened. "How many times do you shovel snow away from those barn doors every winter?" Daniel did not answer. Across the pasture, Walter Kane slowed his horse. Kane owned one of the largest cattle outfits in the area and trusted almost nothing that had not been done the same way for 20 years. He watched Sarah measuring the wind. Then he laughed. "You planning to tell Winter where it's allowed to snow, Mrs. Whitaker?" Sarah returned to her rope. "No." Kane tipped his hat toward Daniel. "Mercer, you've got yourself an engineer." He rode away laughing. That evening, Sarah spread a rough drawing across Daniel's kitchen table. The plan was simple enough to explain. Raise the hay above the ground using flat stone cottonwood runners and woven willow mats. Dig a drainage trench around the barn. Extend the western roof. Leave breathing space between stored hay and the walls. Cut a screened opening low on one wall. Add another vent beneath the roof ridge, then build a freestanding wind fence northwest of the livestock shed. Daniel studied the drawing. He agreed with the raised floor. He agreed with drainage. He even agreed the roof needed work. Then Sarah explained the wind fence. 6 feet high, roughly 27 feet from the shed. Not square to the wind. Turn it about 18 degrees. Daniel looked at her. "Why?" "Because I don't want to stop the wind. That's usually why people build a fence. I want to change where it drops the snow." Daniel leaned back. "A winter barn should be tight." "Dry is more important than tight." "You leave openings and the cold gets inside." "You seal everything and moisture stays inside." Before Daniel could answer, Walter Kane rode into the yard with a bull he wanted to trade. He saw the drawing. His grin appeared immediately. "Now you're inviting wind into the hay barn." Noah lowered his eyes. Kane tapped the paper. "Mercer, there's a reason barns have walls." Sarah rolled the drawing halfway closed. Kane looked toward her. "No offense." "Then none taken," he laughed again. After he left, Noah spoke quietly. "You don't have to stand there while people make fun of you." Sarah looked at her son. "I don't need him to believe me." "Then why do it?" "Because being embarrassed doesn't make an idea wrong." Daniel looked down at the drawing again. Sarah pointed toward the northwest corner of the yard. "Let me build one section, a short test fence. We watch what the wind does. If it fails, I take it apart myself." Daniel thought about it. "You still finish your regular work first." "I will." "Then build your test." The final weeks of September became a steady rhythm of labor. Daniel and Noah lifted old hay from the ground. They placed flat stones. Then cottonwood runners. They repaired doors. They strengthened the western roof. Sarah and Emma sorted every bale by smell and color. Anything sour or damp went into a separate stack. They wove fresh willow into mats beneath the good hay. Sarah marked each stack with charcoal according to when it had been cut. At the end of each workday, all four worked on the test fence. Willow posts, juniper rails, bundled grass, rawhide lashings. Daniel taught Noah to use a plumb line. Sarah taught him to watch the dust. "Don't trust a compass alone," she said. "The land tells you what the wind actually does." Noah began to understand something. Daniel and his mother knew different things. Neither kind of knowledge made the other worthless. Inside the house, Sarah always left one cup of coffee warming on the stove when Daniel returned late from checking cattle. She never mentioned it. Daniel never thanked her. He simply drank it. One night, Noah left his boots beside the door, with one sole almost worn through. By morning, the leather had been repaired. Daniel said nothing. Noah wore the boots all day without asking who had fixed them. Emma tied a strip of red cloth to the final post of the test fence. "Now we can see the wind." Daniel looked at the fluttering cloth. "Your mother already does." Silver's cough also began to improve once the upper barn vent remained open during the day. One evening, Daniel moved his late wife's chair fully back to the table. Nobody commented. Sarah still sat beside Emma. Near the end of September, the first hard northwest wind swept through the valley. There was no snow, only dry, cutting wind. Smoke flattened above the chimney. Loose straw raced across the yard. Barn doors rattled. The cattle moved toward the protected side of the shed. Sarah, Daniel, Noah, and Emma stood behind the test fence. The wind struck. Then the dust changed direction. Instead of driving directly toward the livestock shed, it slid along the angled barrier and spilled into open ground east of the barn. Dry grass collected there, far from the doors. Emma carried 2 identical water buckets outside. She placed one behind the fence. She left the other where Daniel normally kept it. By morning, the exposed bucket had a thick crust of ice. The sheltered one had only a thin skin. Daniel walked the length of the fence. He pushed every post. At the north end, he handed Noah a maul. "These 2 need another 6 inches. Before noon, Walter Kane rode past. He looked at the drifted grass. "September dust isn't December snow." Sarah nodded. "You're right." Kane seemed disappointed she had agreed. Sarah continued. "It only tells us the wind can be redirected. Snow will tell us whether the fence deserves to stay." Daniel loosened a post with his boot. Then he handed Sarah the hammer. It was a small gesture. She understood it. The first real mistake came only days later. An early, cold rain was moving toward the valley. Sarah wanted the hay protected before it arrived. She rushed. Along the northwest wall, she stacked fresh hay tightly against the boards. She knew she had planned to leave a 4-inch breathing gap. She ignored it. They were tired. The clouds were coming. She convinced herself it could be fixed later. 3 nights afterward, Emma entered the barn to gather hay for Silver. She stopped. The air smelled wrong. Sweet, warm, almost sour. She touched one of the nail heads along the wall. It was damp.
Mom?
Sarah came immediately. She pushed a long iron rod into the center of the haystack. She waited, then pulled it free and pressed the metal against her wrist. Too warm. She opened one bale. Moisture had collected deep inside. Daniel joined them. Sarah stared at the hay. She had spent weeks telling him trapped moisture was dangerous. Now the only serious problem in the barn existed because she had ignored her own rule. Noah looked at her. What do we do? Take it down. All of it, every bale along this wall. We spent the whole day stacking it. Sarah pulled the first bale free. We can replace one day's work. She looked at him. We cannot replace a winter's feed. Daniel said nothing. He cut the binding on the nearest bale. Together, they rebuilt the stack. 4 inches from the wall, upper vent open, damaged hay removed, core temperature checked every morning. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table longer than usual. Daniel entered. You knew Kane would hear about this. Probably. He'll enjoy it, Sarah nodded. Daniel poured coffee. You still tore it apart. It was wrong. Daniel sat across from her. Most people defend bad work longer than they defend good sense. Sarah looked toward him. That's supposed to make me feel better? No. A pause. Coffee might. She smiled, only for a second. The next test belonged to Noah. Daniel had him rebuild the side entrance to the hay barn. If a storm buries the front doors, this could become the only way inside. He showed Noah how to choose seasoned wood, how to set a latch slightly downhill so gravity helped hold it closed, how to leave enough space for ice. Test it dry, then wet it. Wood changes. Noah wanted to finish before dark. The seasoned timber Daniel had chosen was hard. A fresh green piece was easier to shape. Noah used it instead. When the latch began sticking, he pulled his father's folding chisel from his pocket and forced the wood. The retaining block cracked. Noah pushed everything back into position. When Daniel asked whether the job was finished, Noah said yes. Cold rain fell overnight. By morning, the green timber had swollen. The side door would not move. Daniel removed the latch. Fresh sap shone inside the wood. Then he noticed the chisel marks. He looked at Noah. The rain didn't do all of this. Noah stared at the ground. Daniel set the broken pieces on a barrel. The door is easy to rebuild, Noah looked up. Trust takes longer. Daniel's voice remained calm. If a man tells me a gate is secure when it isn't, I don't know whether cattle will be there tomorrow. If he tells me a barn door is safe when it isn't, I don't know whether somebody gets trapped during a storm. Noah swallowed. I was going to fix it. After saying it was finished. Daniel walked away. Noah spent the afternoon rebuilding the latch with seasoned timber. He soaked it in cold water. He left it overnight. The next morning, he opened and closed the door 6 times. Only then did he find Daniel. It's finished now. Daniel tested it once, then nodded. Early October brought Gideon Price back to Mercer Ranch. The black ledger was tucked beneath his coat. The last major freight wagon would leave Pine Hollow before the mountain road froze. Sarah still owed $38.70. For the first time, Daniel heard the complete story. He waited until Gideon rode away. Then he turned toward Sarah. You told me Luke left debts. He did. You didn't tell me he pledged everything you owned. I brought enough trouble here. Daniel's eyes hardened. I'm not angry about the money. Sarah said nothing. I'm angry because you decided which truth belonged in this house. He offered to pay the debt using money set aside for spring seed. Sarah refused. No. It settles the account and leaves you short when planting season comes. I'll manage, so will I. Sarah laid her own plan on the table. Eggs, butter, Hand-sewn saddlebags, quilted saddle liners, winter mending, a share from any cattle sold after winter. Every dollar she earned would go toward the debt. Gideon agreed to accept payments and extend the deadline until after the spring cattle sale. He forgave nothing. That evening, Daniel carried his late wife's chair back to the table and set it beside his own. Then he opened the ledger. "Sit." Sarah hesitated. "Sarah." She sat. Together they counted every dollar she still needed. Emma stood beside the stove. "Will we have to leave if Mama can't pay before snow?" Daniel did not even look up from the figures. "Nobody is leaving this ranch over $38. Noah watched him carefully. A week later, Dr. Samuel Harlan arrived in Pine Hollow to inspect cattle before winter. Harlan was 57 and had spent decades treating livestock across Wyoming and Colorado. He carried a brass thermometer, a long hay probe, a weather journal, and a barometer in a padded wooden case. Walter Kane invited him to inspect Kane's ranch first. Kane's hay barn was packed from ground to rafters. Every crack had been sealed. Kane proudly slapped the wall. "Warm as a kitchen." Dr. Harlan pushed the probe deep into the hay. When he pulled it out, the metal smelled faintly sour. The center of the stack was noticeably warmer than the air. "Fresh hay," Kane said. Dr. Harlan made no argument. At Mercer Ranch, he inspected Sarah's system. Hay raised from the ground. Breathing space beside the walls, lower screened vent, upper ridge vent, drainage trench, extended western roof. He pushed the probe into several stacks. The metal returned almost the same temperature as the surrounding air. The lower layers were dry. No condensation appeared on the nail heads. Dr. Harlan wrote in his journal, "Better." Sarah crossed her arms. "Better isn't finished." Dr. Harlan looked at her. "Exactly." He pointed toward the lower vent. "Keep leaves away from it. Don't let drifting snow block it. Never stack wet hay beside dry. Inspect that wind fence after every hard blow." Then Emma brought him to Silver. He listened to the calf's lungs. "The cough is improving," Emma smiled. Dr. Harlan looked toward Daniel. "Don't seal the barn because the weather turns cold. Damp air can weaken a calf faster than clean winter air." Walter Kane had followed him to Mercer Ranch. He frowned. "A few degrees of temperature won't save anybody." Dr. Harlan closed his journal. "Hay doesn't need a warm barn." He looked toward Kane. "It needs a dry one that doesn't start cooking itself from the inside." By mid-October, Sarah began making real payments. She sold eggs, butter, 2 saddlebags, 4 quilted saddle liners. Daniel and Noah made braided rawhide leads. Noah kept the money notebook. He counted every coin twice. At the trading post, Emma wrapped purchases while watching Silver, who had been brought into town for Dr. Harlan to examine again. One of Walter Kane's hired men walked past Noah. He had been drinking. "So you're Mercer's new boy." Noah ignored him. The man laughed louder. "Living on another man's ranch while your mother hunts herself a new husband." Several men near the loading dock turned to watch. Then the ranch hand looked toward Sarah. "Guess 2 hungry children make good bait." Noah's hand moved into his coat pocket. His fingers closed around the chisel. Emma saw it. Daniel was on the far side of the yard. For one long second, Noah imagined driving the man backward into the mud. Then he remembered the frozen barn door. He remembered Daniel saying that something did not become safe because a man claimed it was. Noah released the chisel. He looked directly at the ranch hand. "My mother has paid for every meal we've eaten with work." The man smirked. Noah continued, "And a grown man who needs an audience before insulting a woman probably hasn't earned much worth respecting." A few men laughed, this time not at Noah. He took Emma's hand and walked toward the wagon. No fight, no shove, no threat. Gideon Price had witnessed everything. He entered Sarah's latest payment into the ledger without recounting the money twice. On the ride home, Daniel handed Noah the remaining money pouch. Noah tried to return it. Daniel shook his head. "I gave it to you to carry." Noah tucked the pouch beneath his coat. He guarded it as if the ranch depended on it. By late October, 3 nights of hard, freezing weather tested everything they had built. Leaves clogged half the lower hay vent. One section of the drainage trench settled. Ice formed around the side door. Rawhide lashings tightened in the cold and pulled 2 wind fence posts slightly out of line. Silver refused her morning milk. Winter had not destroyed anything. It had simply begun searching for weakness. Sarah divided the work. "Noah door first, then the fence posts." She pointed toward Daniel. "Finish the west roof." Then to herself. "I'll clear the drainage." Emma was already kneeling beside Silver. She pressed her hand into the bedding. The top felt dry. Underneath it was damp. She pulled back several handfuls. Cold moisture had collected beneath the straw. Emma stripped the entire pen. She replaced it with a thinner layer of dry bedding. Then she filled a stoneware bottle with warm water, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it near Silver's belly. Daniel watched from the doorway. "You figured that out yourself?" Emma nodded. "The wet straw was making her colder." Daniel looked toward Sarah. Sarah smiled. "Runs in the family." By the 3rd morning, Silver was standing. The drainage trench carried water away from the barn. The side door opened freely. The wind fence stood straight again. The hay remained dry. Daniel entered every repair in a notebook. Then he wrote how much milk Silver had taken. Noah looked over his shoulder. "Seems like a lot of work for something that's supposed to make winter easier." Daniel closed the notebook. "A good system doesn't remove work." He looked around the ranch. "It makes every hour of work count." November passed without a major storm. Sarah continued making payments. At night, she sewed by lamplight, using needles from Daniel's wife's old sewing box. Daniel sometimes repaired harness across the table. Neither felt the need to fill every silence. Noah became stronger, more patient. Emma became impossible to remove from Silver's pen. One evening, Daniel found Sarah studying the empty wall beside the stove. "I was thinking a shelf there would keep flour away from the damp." "I'll build it. I can build a shelf. I know." Sarah looked at him. "Then why offer?" Daniel shrugged. "Because I can build one too." The next evening, Noah found the shelf half finished. Daniel handed him a plane. "Your turn." By early December, the valley remained bitterly cold, but strangely calm. Some ranchers began saying the warnings had been exaggerated. Walter Kane had changed almost nothing. He stacked more hay. He sealed more cracks. One afternoon, he stopped near Mercer Ranch and looked at Sarah's wind fence. "That's a lot of work for a storm that doesn't seem interested in coming." Sarah inspected one of the lashings. "It doesn't need to come." King laughed. "Then you've wasted your time." Sarah pulled the rawhide tighter. "I'd rather waste time preparing than livestock regretting." The weather changed 2 days later, not with wind, with silence. Smoke stopped rising vertically from the chimney. It flattened across the sky. Cattle turned their backs northwest even though the air seemed still. Sparrows abandoned the barn roof. The fence wire no longer produced its usual thin whistle. It hummed, low and steady. Daniel noticed first. Dr. Harlan's barometer, which he had left for Daniel to watch, began falling. Fast. Before sunset, Ruth Bell arrived by sled. She looked toward the northwest. "I've seen this once before." Daniel came down from the porch. "When?" "The winter my husband was still alive." She tightened her scarf. "Day was so quiet we could hear axes from half a mile away. Storm hit after midnight." Nobody argued. Daniel ordered the cattle moved closer to the uphill lane. Sarah brought out several lengths of rope. She tied bright red cloth along each one. One rope connected the house to the livestock barn. Another connected the barn to the hay storage. Another ran toward the side entrance. Another marked the route beside the wind fence. Noah tested the latch he had rebuilt. Wet, dry, frozen. It opened. Emma moved Silver into the sheltered pen nearest the side entrance. Sarah checked the upper vent. Daniel reinforced the roof. Nobody called it a final preparation. Supper was quiet. Before bed, Daniel tied one additional guide rope from the porch to the window beside the children's room. Sarah saw him. "You think they'll need that?" Daniel looked toward the dark yard. "No." A pause. "But I want it there." The storm arrived shortly after midnight. At first, very little new snow fell. The wind tore old snow from the ground. Within minutes, the ranch disappeared inside a moving wall of white. The wind fence took the first blow. The northern posts bent. Rawhide stretched. The barrier held. Snow struck the fence and changed direction. Instead of burying the livestock doors, the largest drift began building across the empty ground Sarah had chosen months earlier. Then a different sound cut through the storm. Wood cracking. Daniel opened the door. A board beneath the extended western roof had broken loose. The wind was lifting it repeatedly. If the board tore free, air could get beneath the roof covering. The whole section might peel away. Daniel tied a rope around his waist. "I'll secure it." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Use the side entrance." He nodded, then disappeared into the white. He reached the hay barn by following the red guide rope. Inside, he climbed to the loft. The roof shook. He reached for the loose board. A crossbeam twisted, then jumped from its seat. Daniel fell. His shoulder hit the floor first. His ankle folded beneath him. He shouted once. Noah heard him from below. Sarah and Noah dragged him down through the side entrance. Daniel tried to stand. His leg collapsed. The roof. Sarah looked upward, then past the barn. Something worse was happening. Snow was beginning to pile into the cattle lane. A short section of secondary fencing was catching the wind at the wrong angle. Instead of guiding snow away, it had created a pocket where the drift was building rapidly. If the lane disappeared, the herd could not reach high ground. The barn doors could become trapped from the outside. Sarah pointed. "That section has to come down." Daniel looked toward the cattle. "If you open that fence, they could break through." Sarah watched the drifting snow. "If it stays standing, the storm builds a wall across the lane." Daniel hesitated. For months, Sarah had asked him to trust measurements, observations, small tests. Now there was no test left, only the storm. Daniel pulled the rawhide knife from his belt. He held it out. "You see what the wind is doing?" "Yes." "Then do what you see." Sarah turned immediately. "Noah, I'm ready. Follow the red rope to the secondary fence. Cut 2 lashings, remove 3 rails. Then open the side barn door." Noah nodded. "Emma." The girl looked up. "Stay inside the livestock shed. Keep the lantern low. Open each gate only when Noah calls. Keep Silver back until the herd passes." Emma swallowed. "What if the air gets bad? Tell me immediately." Daniel sat beneath the damaged roof, unable to stand. "Keep the cattle in a line," he shouted over the wind. "Don't panic them." Sarah tied an old wool blanket between 2 posts near the lane. It became a temporary wind deflector. Noah reached the secondary fence. His gloves were already stiff with ice. He cut the first rawhide lashing, then the second. He pulled out 1 rail, then another, then a third. The wind changed almost instantly. Snow that had been piling toward the cattle lane swept through the opening. The drift began stretching toward the empty field instead. Sarah watched for several seconds. It worked! Noah could barely hear her. He ran toward the side door. The latch was frozen. Solid. Noah reached into his coat. The folding chisel came out. Months earlier, he would have driven the blade directly into the latch and forced it. Instead, he stopped. He remembered Daniel's lesson. Test it. Understand it. Then act. Noah used the back of the tool to tap away surface ice. Then he worked the blade carefully along the seam. Small pieces broke free. He moved slowly. The latch shifted, then opened. Noah shouted, "Door!" Inside the livestock shed, Emma opened the first gate. The cattle refused to move into the storm. Noah stepped outside first. He held the red guide rope. The lead cow followed only a few steps before stopping. Sarah moved beside her. No shouting, no whipping, no panic. She kept pressure on the herd until one animal moved, then another. Daniel called directions from behind them. "Keep the lead cow left. Give her room. Don't crowd the calves." Inside the shed, Emma faced a choice. Silver was frightened. The calf pressed against her leg. Emma could move Silver first, or open the second gate before the main herd crowded the passage. She looked toward the gate, then at Silver. "I'll come back." Emma left the calf in the dry pen. She opened the next gate, then the last. Only after the final cow entered the uphill lane did she return. Silver was exactly where Emma had left her. Outside, one of the main wind fence posts lurched. Noah saw it. The base had shifted. If the post failed, part of the fence could collapse. He grabbed a short length of cottonwood. Too large. He pulled out the folding chisel. He split the wood carefully, then drove the wedge beneath the post. Sarah added another brace. The post settled back into place. For the first time, the chisel Noah carried because of the man who abandoned him was being used to protect the people who had stayed. Near dawn, the wind weakened. Nobody celebrated. They walked the ranch first. The main wind fence leaned, but it stood. The largest snowdrift rested exactly where Sarah had hoped it would, far beyond the livestock entrance. The side door remained accessible. Part of the western roof covering had torn loose. The hay beneath it remained dry. The drainage trench was frozen but clear. No water had collected beneath the raised barn floor. Every cow reached higher ground. Silver was alive. No animal had suffocated. None were trapped. Daniel sat on a wooden crate with his ankle wrapped. He looked toward Sarah. "How bad?" "The roof needs work." The cattle, all alive. The hay, dry. Daniel looked toward the leaning wind fence. Sarah followed his eyes. After several seconds, Daniel laughed. It was the first time any of them had heard him laugh that loudly. North of Mercer Ranch, Walter Kane had not been as fortunate. His main hay barn entrance was buried. Damp hay near the floor had frozen into a solid mass. Snow loaded one side of the roof unevenly. Part of it collapsed. Several cattle survived only because Kane's ranch hands cut through a rear wall. When the storm ended, Walter Kane rode to Mercer Ranch asking for help. His pride had disappeared somewhere under the snow. Noah saw him arrive. So did Daniel. Neither mentioned the insults at the trading post. Sarah simply pulled on her coat. At Kane's ranch, she gave instructions. "Open the upper vent first. Take hay from the dry side. Nobody climbs onto that roof. Dig a protected access path instead of forcing the buried door." Kane obeyed. 2 days later, Dr. Harlan returned. He checked the cattle. He tested the hay. He inspected the barn floors. He walked the snowdrifts. Then he stood beside Sarah's leaning wind fence. He opened his journal. Mercer Ranch lost no cattle. Daniel nodded. Nearly all winter feed remained usable. Another nod. Walter Kane stood beside them. He stared at the drift resting harmlessly beyond the livestock doors. Finally, he asked Sarah the question he had laughed at months earlier. "Why 18 degrees?" Sarah pointed toward the snow. "You don't have to beat the wind." Kane waited. "You just have to give it somewhere better to go." Kane did not apologize. Instead, he called one of his ranch hands. "Bring a measuring rope." The wind fence remained standing through the rest of winter. It was never perfectly straight again. Nobody cared. Because the cattle survived, and the winter hay remained usable, Daniel did not have to sell animals early. He waited for the planned market. Prices held, the ranch held, so did Sarah's future. Over the following weeks, she counted every dollar she earned: eggs, butter, saddlebags, quilted liners, wages, her share from the cattle she had helped save. One cold morning, she entered Gideon Price's trading post and placed the final payment on the counter. Gideon counted it. $38.70, paid in full. He opened the black leather ledger. Luke Whitaker's name remained on the page. Gideon drew one line through the debt. Then he reached beneath the counter. First came the ownership papers for Sarah's sewing machine, then the mule papers, then the claim to the 2 wool blankets. Sarah touched the papers but did not immediately take them. Gideon closed the ledger. Some debts tell you more about the person who left them than the person who paid them. Sarah looked at him. Is that your way of saying Luke came back? No. Any word? None. Sarah nodded. The answer hurt less than she expected. She gathered the papers. When she returned to Mercer Ranch, she placed them inside the same worn travel bundle she had carried from Pine Hollow. Daniel saw her. You still keeping that packed? It's where I keep important things. It used to be what you kept ready in case you had to leave. Sarah stopped. Daniel opened a drawer and removed a clean sheet of paper. This is what I can offer. Sarah slowly sat down. Daniel read the agreement. Sarah would oversee the ranch house hay storage, winter provisions, and household accounts. She would receive wages plus a share of annual ranch profit. Noah would become Daniel's paid apprentice. Emma would own Silver and receive the first 2 calves born from her line. Sarah and both children would be entered into the long-term homestead agreement for Mercer Ranch. Sarah looked at Daniel. This is more than employment. Yes. You thought this through since the storm. She studied him. Only since the storm. Daniel's mouth moved slightly. No. Sarah looked toward the window. The wind fence stood in the distance, bent, scarred, still useful. Daniel rested both hands on the table. The day you arrived, I thought I was making sure 3 strangers didn't starve. Sarah looked back at him. You kept this ranch alive. He paused. And you stopped this house from feeling like a place where somebody had died. Neither spoke for several seconds. Daniel continued. I'm not asking you for an answer tonight. Sarah looked down at the agreement, then toward the travel bundle. She removed the ownership papers. She opened the kitchen cabinet. She placed them inside. The bundle remained empty. Daniel understood. That evening, Noah sat alone at the workbench. He removed Luke's folding chisel from his pocket. He turned it over in his hand. For months he had carried it because it was one of the only things his father had left behind. At first, it had represented hope, then anger, then distrust. During the storm, it had become simply a tool. Noah used it to carve a new latch pin for the family tool chest. When he finished, he carried the pin to Daniel. Daniel tested it. Good fit. He handed it back. Noah installed it. Then he lifted the tool chest and started toward the workbench. Halfway across the room, he stopped. Pa! Daniel froze. Noah seemed not to notice what he had said. Where do you want this? For several seconds, Daniel could not answer. Then he pointed toward the open space beside his own workbench. Right there. Noah placed the chest beside Daniel's tools. Emma sat in the chair that had once faced the wall. Silver was outside with the other calves. Sarah took the seat beside Daniel. A pot of stew simmered near the fire. 4 bowls waited on the table. Outside the wind fence leaned beneath the weight of old snow. One post stood slightly crooked. 2 rails had been replaced. A red strip of cloth still fluttered from the far end. The fence had never defeated the wind. It had never needed to. It had simply changed where the storm could do its damage. Much like the people inside the house. Sarah had arrived believing survival meant carrying everything she owned in one bundle. Noah had believed trust was something foolish people gave away. Emma had believed every goodbye might become permanent. Daniel had believed loneliness was safer than losing someone again. Winter proved each of them wrong. A home was not a place that never faced a storm. It was a place built carefully enough that when the storm arrived, everyone knew which door to open, which rope to follow, and who would still be standing beside them when the wind finally stopped.